The story begins with the main character's body lying wounded on the floor. The other members of the squad she was fighting with immediately ran up to her. One of them immediately said that Aaron is just an idiot and why she did all this. The man who was treating her in the squad immediately started to help. But after a moment, he said that the rate of infection was too high. If the body starts to decompose, it would be impossible to resurrect her. The heroine lay there thinking that she was in a lot of pain at this moment. The goal of their squad was to exterminate Kunturna. He was a demonic dragon that disrupted the world order. The members of their squad were great warriors gathered from different world dimensions. The girls in this squad were the main character, as well as Hanaya and Jamil. There were also the men Zephyr and Gedor. The latter declared to Aaron that they would never forget her noble sacrifice. Zephyr remarked to him that the same should be said after her eyes were forever closed and called the guy just a dumbass. The leader of this entire company was a hero of hard times. The strongest, who united the world and the dimension entirely, as well as the only close friend of the protagonist Elkinas. Leading the squad, he guided everyone to the lowest levels of the demonic cave. And at the very moment when he was about to strike the demon dragon, the decisive blow, the unthinkable, happened. It turns out that it was the dragon's breath and the protagonist noticed it. At the same time, there was already no time for reflection. The girl immediately decided that it was necessary to act and pushed her friend Al. It turns out that in the next instant, she absorbed the sphere's breath. Kunturna's breath is a poisonous gas that exists in the form of small spheres before changing into a gaseous state. This means that at that moment, one can defend against it with SMS with the slightest of losses. That is, based on this, there is an opportunity to save all lives, sacrificed only one person. It turns out that then the main character sacrificed herself, and at that moment, she did not think about anything, because it was necessary to save them all. After everyone ran up to her, the heroine asked the dragon if he was dead or not. Jamil to her immediately noticed that naturally he is dead, but for some reason just silently sacrificed himself, and most importantly why. The protagonist eyed and remarked that even if it would have saved them, there was simply no time to stop the shield. Her companion added to her that then they should have just died altogether instead of sacrificing themselves. With tears in her eyes, she went on to say that still he hadn't promised that if they died, they would only die together. Aaron added to her that you took control of yourself and did not cry. Suddenly, the girl felt that it seemed that the poison had already affected her vision. After all, a little before, the faces of the guys were so clear, but now she could not see anything at all. She further thought that perhaps her sensitivity was gone because she could not feel pain. But although it was for the best, because death will be without pain. After that, the heroine turned to El and asked why he was not suitable. After all, she wants to look at him for the last time, because it is necessary to look at a beautiful face for the last time. Then she added that she was in a great mood and had always wondered how she would feel at the moment of death. She didn't think it would be so easy and joyful, and that's just great, because she's so happy. She remarked one last time that they all got to live just a great life. This was the very end of the main character's remaining memory. Sometime after that, the heroine appeared again on Earth. Suddenly, the girl wondered if she had really woken up and how it could have happened. After all, it turns out that definitely she fought with the demonic dragon Kunturna, and during the last attack, she had definitely died. Now the girl sat there wondering what had happened in the first place. She didn't know what this place was, but there was a distinct spirit energy here. Still, she wondered where she was after all. After looking around a bit better, she realized that she was probably near the World Tree. At this time, a guy approached her and said that all this is true. The heroine immediately turned to the interlocutor and was surprised, asking if it was Zephyr. The one, in turn, noting that she got it right and it had been a long time since they had seen her, called her an enchantress. It was just a man from the squad that fought with the protagonist Draconian, Lord Zephyr. The girl immediately wondered why he was the one who had been talking for a long time. He, in turn, remarked that it had been 80 years since that time. The heroine was surprised and asked him what he had been saying for 80 years, after the interlocutor remarked that they must have succeeded in their experiment. Next, they walked together towards the house. The heroine walked along the road and thought that, considering how abandoned for 80 years the dragon's nest must be, She could say that it was quite clean and cozy, as if people lived there. It appeared that Zephyr still had unfinished business in this world. She turned to him next and asked him how it all happened. She wanted him to explain to her what had happened. The one remarked to her that he had secretly hidden her soul from everyone as soon as she died. The heroine asked how else he had hidden it. The guy went on to say that at that moment, a spiritual orb appeared from her mouth. Her soul was so happy and was getting ready to go to the world of the dead. It literally said that those happily stayed, for she had reset herself near this mortal world and was going to seek her happiness. That's why he took her away then. The girl immediately hit the table and noticed what it was that he was saying. After all, who was he to go against the very laws of nature? Zephyr remarked to her that he just wanted to help her soul find peace under the world tree that the dragons guarded. She was worthy after all, this one person whom the spirits had gifted with love. The girl immediately thought that even though she was a spirit caster, that fact did not give her the right to rest in such a place. Which meant that Zephyr, being the protector of the world tree, had violated countless of his duties to bring her here. Next, she thanked the guy, but she wondered how she was still alive after all. He remarked that the whole thing was indeed strange. After all, the world tree had demanded his blood, and he thought that was the price for resting her soul here, so he gave it to her. However, the tree began to create a sphere of branches and leaves in its crown, and then enclosed her soul in its embrace, as if it was going to bring her back to life. After a while, the girl's body began to form, and after 80 years, she was born. The main character was surprised because of this and asked what he was carrying. The side added that she had changed a lot compared to her past self and handed her a mirror at once. She immediately took it in her hands and looked at her renewed face. She was in great shock at what she saw. Zephyr wondered if he and the world tree could call it a joint experiment. After all, they had created this body together, and the experiment had been extremely successful. It turns out, if we understand the human view, he is her father, and the world tree is her mother. Afterwards, he noticed that if she wanted to, she could call him father. But he did not have time to even say all this, as in his head flew a mirror, which was held by the heroine. Because of this, he said that if everything is so, he will briefly tell what happened during this time. The girl added that it was fine then, for she approved of the clause with brevity. The first thing he stated was that, for starters, the warrior Elenis had raved, and those very words sent the girl into absolute shock. Elenis Pontiac, being the scion of a family that belonged to a side branch of the imperial family, and taking possession of the demonic dragon's heart after slaying it, he had risen to the level of a demigod and received eternal life. Upon hearing this, the girl immediately stated that this was all great, but then why did her interlocutor say that he was crazy? Zephyr pointed out that it was all because Elenis had taken Conturna's egg and was now taking care of it. The protagonist immediately wondered if Conturna's demonic dragon was the same one that was their enemy. Also remarked why no one stopped him then after all. The interlocutor added that all of his battle comrades, including him, were against it, but he didn't listen to their arguments. It turns out that all living things discouraged him, and they asked Elenis to get rid of the demonic creature's egg. The heroine inquired that it turns out from these entreaties was no use. The guy, and noticed that he could name a couple deaths from memory. When Duke Pontiac started pressuring him, using the power of the family, he killed the Duke and became the head of the family. Killed his uncle, with whom they were of the same blood in a sense. And the 6th squad of knights sent as a warning to the Denbane Empire by Elenis' homeland were completely wiped out. She and the heroine could not believe her ears, and wondered how such a thing could have happened. She didn't understand why he had an egg and what he would grow this thing inside of it for. Also, why would do such a thing and even go against everyone? Zephyr noticed that he guessed the reason after all. It's all because of Conturna's ability to transcend time and space. After all, it turns out that he wishes to return to the past and change something in it. The heroine immediately stated whether he is just crazy. But still, why go back to that time, if now he is so calm? She wondered what he wanted to change there. The interlocutor immediately added that, for example, he could call her Death. She immediately told him that the guy would not talk nonsense, because it literally makes no sense. But the one, in turn, rhetorically remarked, "Is there really no real sense?" she says. The heroine remarked that of course it does, because everyone is preparing for death, so there is nothing to be done about it. It turns out that even a child understands this, and they took an oath before the trek. Each of them pledged to sacrifice their lives if necessary. Further, the girl thought about why all this is so, but suddenly remembered for Jamil. After all, she was her good friend, a thief with an ego to the skies and Elkin's lover. The girl asked her interlocutor what about Jamil. Zephyr stated that if she was the queen of the thieves' world, she had passed away after dedicating her life to running a criminal organization. At that, he inquired as to why she was there. The girl immediately noticed him in the sense of the one to say why, because to her words, Elkins would definitely listen. She and Jamil, after all, liked each other, and she wondered if they had not played a wedding. The interlocutor stated that there was no wedding after all. The girl was shocked and thought, did they really break up and now everything is clear? After all, if Elkin is with her, such a case, she would also even leave him. After all, where is it seen that a man who was called a great warrior would raise the offspring of a demonic dragon? At that, her interlocutor looked at her with a strange look. The girl asked him about that look too. The guy stated that it was just Elkinus apparently, initially unlucky, but noticed that she just continued. The heroine was surprised and inquired if Jamil and the guy were not dating while doing so. The interlocutor added that, as he said, nothing happened between them because even he knows about it. The heroine remarked, after all, they had such a good relationship, and the two disappeared every night in training. Also, he wasn't afraid to trust her with his defense. The boy wondered if it was training after all. After all, he is a warrior and the heroine entrusted his defense. She asked for it. It turns out that he could also entrust his life to her quietly. Also, the protagonist remembered the guy that they were still forever whispering about something in private, and she always saw it. Every time after that, Elkinus's face would just flame up. Zephyr noticed to the enchantress that there was no way he could tell the reason for that. He would have to tell them himself. The heroine remembered that when she first saw her comrade, he was the shortest boy in their village. Her mother was an herbalist, and every time the girl went shopping with her, she saw the beaten child all the time. One time, seeing such a terrible picture, the girl thought it was necessary to act. Immediately shouted to her Uncle Knight to go to her because sooner and she needs. Barney, that beat her from her friend, hearing this immediately shouted that they should run away faster and got away. The girl immediately went up to the boy and said that she was lucky and they had bought it. At this, she turned to the boy and asked if he was hurt badly and if she could look at the wounds. That's when her future friend allowed her to do so, and she cured him with herbs. And literally immediately afterward, she took him to the forest, where she introduced him to the spirits, which only she could see. The guy was very much interested in this, and he watched with joy. That's how this guy became her best friend. The girl went everywhere together with him, holding hands. With him, she was never, ever lonely. But then one day, Elkins disappeared. According to rumors, he turned out to be a descendant of the Duke of Pontiac. The next time they met was literally 12 years later, the year after her mother passed away. That was the year the protagonist turned 22 years old. She was digging in her flower bed and suddenly a guy came up to her and apologized for being late, addressing Aaron. Afterwards, he added that he wanted to come earlier, but there were circumstances. He told how he tried with all his might to get his family recognized. However, the Pontiac family not only didn't recognize him, but also tried to restrict him in everything. That was why he didn't have the opportunity to return back then. The heroine immediately wondered if that meant he now had options to stay here quietly. But the guy remarked to her that still no, because he would have to leave again. All this just because he was ordered to catch a dragon in the Denbane Empire. The girl wondered what other dragon, and if he was really talking about the demonic dragon Kunturna. She also wondered if he alone should be able to handle it. The boy remarked that this was why he had come to see Aaron, declared that someday he would come back again and would definitely stay alive. But the heroine immediately shrieked to him that it would snow. Come what may from her, after all, she is a spellcaster, and wondered if he even remembered it. Before her mother had left this world, she had told her about her outstanding abilities. The interlocutor was greatly surprised afterward, then added that he couldn't endanger her as well after all, and she just needed to wait for the guy here. The heroine remarked to him what he was even talking about. It turns out that even if he stays here, it does not guarantee her safety, because this world is full of danger. She continued begging for them to go with Elenis. I noticed that in her entire life, she has never had a friend other than a boyfriend. Because of this, it turns out, she can't just let him go when they first met after all these years. Boyfriend was very much surprised by this, but he continued to listen in silence. The girl said that she would never be a burden to him. Walking side by side with him, she would also gain her strength. Because of this, the interlocutor smiled and said, Aaron, that he simply had no words. And further still, he agreed. Immediately afterwards, he grabbed the girl's hand and knelt down in front of her. At that, he turned to her and stated that of all the people he knows of, we are the kindest and bravest. Also, his one and only and inimitable friend. The girl from such words and from such a situation was simply shocked. Elenis then stated that they would live this life, hand in hand, and meet death together, and asked if she agreed. Next, he bowed to the girl's hand and kissed it. In doing so, he declared that when their wanderings came to an end, they would certainly stay together. The protagonist now sat and pondered over this with tears in her eyes, thinking about what it even was and how her sweet and kind Elenis could do such a thing. Zephyr had said that he thought his ears would bleed if he ever heard it again. The girl called him a soulless draconic and stated to at least think. After all, how could the kindest child become the common enemy of the entire continent in an instant? The interlocutor stated to her because of this that he was not the enemy of the entire continent, of course. Further stated the sorceress that she still talks about his kindness, except that his character does not match her description at all. With the exception of her, he behaved with everyone just disgusting. The protagonist, he immediately stated to him what he was carrying. He told her not to say anything bad about their Elenis, all because he observed etiquette and kneeled even before such a hillbilly as this girl. It turns out that he is not at all what his interlocutor thinks he is. The guy sitting next to him stated just about that part. How could one accept this offer to cooperate with him? There are no words. Do spellcasters always have only one wind in their heads, or what? The heroine immediately thought that in front of her sits some asshole is still sharp on the tongue. Next, the girl asked her interlocutor what happened to Hananai and Gedor. Zephyr said that Hananea had become the head of the Church of Altima and had passed away at the age of 97. God had shown her special love, so by now she was probably already an angel or low-ranking god. Gedor, on the other hand, was unable to change Elenis's mind and return to his homeland, taking a place in the tribe's chiefdom. Upon hearing this, the heroine declared that it was all right then. After all, it turns out now everyone but Elenis is doing fine, but then got upset and thought that it was all wrong. After all, she shouldn't be happy about it, and was upset for her friend. Zephyr looked at this and stated that she was up to her old tricks again. Next, the girl continued to drink and stated what on earth was going on, but the interlocutor noticed the enchantress to stop drinking. Suddenly, the heroine put down her mug and declared that it was decided then. She will immediately go to her old friend. She will come and tell him that she has come back to life, and at the same time talk him out of his scheme with the egg of that very creature. Let Elenis and take care of him properly, but if there is even the slightest chance of a creature like Kunterna, the heroine personally get rid of him. After all, the girl knew that she could not allow the same terrible tragedy that had happened before to happen again. Suddenly, Zephyr asked the sorceress if she thought she could make the boy believe her. She, in turn, said with a smile that of course he would, because she was his only friend. And it turns out that he recognizes her at first sight. The interlocutor immediately remarked to her that it seemed that she hadn't gotten it yet. Added that it's all right after all, and it's better to experience it for yourself. The heroine wondered with surprise if she had said something wrong. Next, Zephyr stood up and stated that it was fine then, and he would go along with her. Still, her human body is an important specimen with noble dragon blood as a base. It turns out that Elenis won't be able to mindlessly chop it up. The heroine inquired about what this guy was saying. He, in turn, stated a change in appearance. Since he hasn't announced the end of the transformation, he can change his appearance as much as he wants. Hearing these words, the protagonist realized everything. Why Zephyr's appearance is still the same as it was a long time ago. Transformation is a technique used by dragons to stay in the human world. There are laws specifically for them regarding this skill. After one transformation, dragons must either take a break for 1,000 years or interrupt the transformation. And when the spell is used again, they must take their former form. The interlocutor also stated that all of this is correct and it is against the rules, but further remarked to the enchantress that this time the transformation is just necessary to fulfill the great mission. Decisions are made according to his personal assessment of the situation and the Dragon Lord's assessment. The heroine wondered if he didn't think that such an interpretation was beneficial only to himself. To this, the interlocutor stated nothing. At the same time, he said that in order not to be conspicuous, perhaps he should become some kind of earl. And the girl was shocked that he ignored her words. Next, the guy turned to the girl and asked her what title she liked after all. She inquired about becoming an aristocrat as well. Zephyr remarked that naturally she would. He further asked if she was so eager to claim that she was an arena sorceress who had died 80 years ago during a battle with the demonic dragon Kunturna. After all, was this really the kind of bland speech she had planned for her appearance in her new guise? After all, it turns out she must somehow explain what happened to her. The girl immediately wondered about the aristocrat. Then she added that in truth, she had always wanted to be a noblewoman. All those tea ceremonies with the beautiful tea service and the ballroom were all things she wanted to be. Zephyr remarked to the enchantress that she was already a noblewoman. The heroine was surprised because of this and questioned if she was. The guy went on to say that all the squad members had received titles, and in her case too. Due to her honorable demise, she was posthumously glorified as a state mage of the empire. Again, the heroine was simply shocked by this information. She asked if she had become a state mage of the empire, and she was included in the aristocracy of the capital. She was given one of the highest titles, allowing her to take part in the management of the magic tower. Further stated that it was just some kind of shock and stopped to think about everything. At the same time, it was reported that she just couldn't believe it. The interlocutor at the same time stated that it was understandable that she was not aware of it. It would be nice to visit her grave when they come down. First, however, one must leave one's choice on Count Imturn. He is raising a daughter. The estate in the countryside has never visited the capital, but there is enough money to put his family name on the list of nobility, and it suits them. Though it could still turn out to be fake and created to evade paying taxes, the heroine stated that he should wait a bit. After all, if he says he has a daughter, it does not mean that she will be her daughter. Suddenly, the girl looked at her interlocutor and asked him what happened to his face. And he, in turn, had already changed his appearance and asked how she was after all. She remarked that he could probably seduce aristocrats with ease, then added that she wanted to say they would just like him. And the guy added that then it would all be wonderful. With that behind her forked that it was very important for the current purpose of his transformation that the ladies be nice to him and friendly. The heroine inquired what his transformation goal was after all. The guy smilingly said that he would have to play the role of a father who brought his daughter to the capital, who dreams of a noble lifestyle and points. The heroine was infuriated by this, and she declared that he should come to her sooner rather than later. That very same day at night, the heroine went to the street. She approached the world tree and greeted it, then stated that she had heard that it was the one that had brought her back to life. At that, she wondered if there was any particular reason for it. Perhaps there was something she would need to do, or perhaps it wished for something else. The heroine stated that she did not know what that might be. However, she will try to live this life, put forth her best effort in doing so. Also very much wanted to know if she could come back here when she said goodbye to her life. So she asked the tree to allow her to stay with the world tree. Immediately after these words, her body stopped obeying the girl and she was dragged straight to the tree. The girl then hugged the tree and thought that the world tree would probably give an answer using her body. The heroine then immersed herself in the perception of everything with her body. She realized that the tree was asking her not to worry, for she would have the opportunity to fall asleep in its embrace. With a smile on her face in the early morning, the protagonist said goodbye to the world tree and stated that they would definitely meet again. She also met Zephyr, who asked her what she had been doing in the forest all night. She told him that she had said goodbye to the world tree. Next, she showed something to the guy and stated that she had looked into this one. because the world tree had given her this. It had literally just showered her with leaves and particles of light and asked if he had seen it. The boy informed the enchantress that she was indeed and truly loved. Further inquired if she even knew what she could do with those leaves. The girl remarked that certainly she knew that. After all, they will protect her from bad people can contract with more powerful spirits due to the enhancement of magic. Also, if she auctioned even one leaf, she would become fabulously rich. After hearing this, the guy wondered why the world tree liked this crazy woman like this. After that, he grabbed her hand and declared that they should go and walk faster, and also let her hem hold on. They would have tons of things to do on the first day after the transformation. Next, Zephyr snapped his fingers and they moved to a completely different place. The movement startled her a bit and stated that the one had scared her. At that, she inquired about the containment are located. The one stated that they were in an alley and she needed to follow him. After a few moments, he welcomed the sorceress to the place. The girl looked intently ahead and saw something there that amazed her. This place was the richest city of the second most important city in the Denbane Empire. It turns out that this is exactly the domain of Archduke Elenis Pontiac Erin. The heroine looked at it and said that in the second most important city, life is just like this. The interlocutor remarked that it had changed greatly from the past. When the city was under Elenis's rule, the name was changed to Erin, and it has grown considerably in size. Now the preparations for the festival are in full swing, so it's even busier. The heroine asked what kind of festival it was and what they were celebrating. Zephyr stated that it was a special event in this town, a festival in honor of the day the dragon was destroyed. The girl inquired as to what kind of dragon it was, but suddenly a street vendor stated to her that in this tasted dragon, kebab, they use the freshest kunturna meat. The girl was immediately surprised and asked again what the man had just said. Her interlocutor stated that it was just regular chicken and asked that she not act like a redneck. Erin took that kebab after all. She wondered again if the day they had killed Kunturna had been declared a dragon-slaying holiday. Zephyr noted that once a year the whole empire gets very noisy. And pointing his finger, he said that of all the places, it was in the district that they celebrated with the greatest magnitude. And he pointed his finger at the statue that was the heart of this city, Iron Square. And this very statue he was pointing at was considered the pride and symbol of this city. At that, he stated to the enchantress that you looked closely there and inquired if it reminded her of anyone. The girl looked closely and said that she seemed to know her too. The boy added with surprise that most likely she did. After that, she began to examine the statue closely and saw that this power and the oak staff looked quite familiar. After all, they were similar to the ones she had used before. After a moment, an insight did come to her, and she realized that it was her. So she was forcibly surprised and wondered why her monument was there. Then matched the name of the city of Erin along with her name, Arin. The interlocutor added that she got it right, and the city was named after her. So it turns out that she has become the Pop who is immensely missed by the entire empire. Her wanderings together with her battle comrades are dedicated to plays and chants, and spellcasters and naturalists consider Erin almost a sacred place. Also stated that her oak staff is kept in the Archduke's word and is displayed once a year around the same time. Everyone adores her very much and mourns her imminent loss. He then added that if she was lucky, it would be her return after 80 years. The heroine immediately inquired what else it meant if they were lucky and if they might not be so lucky. Her interlocutor said nothing to her, and she noticed that by his silence, she became even more afraid. After a while together, they came to the atelier. All the servants and the manageress lined up there and welcomed Alaire into the atelier. The manageress inquired the same, she could help them. Zephyr, in the guise of her father, stated that they needed several sets of clothes that could be made in the shortest amount of time from their catalog. The woman remarked that was fine, and they would customize everything for them on their budget. He further whispered to the girl that it was so exciting and even fun. It is most profitable to be in the shadows cast by the powerful, so they are bound to enjoy it. Next, thought Zephyr is just some kind of horror. His temper has deteriorated even more. After that, one of the female workers approached the protagonist and told the mistress to follow her. The girl after that immediately agreed and said she was coming. After a few moments, the heroine came out and stated that she just couldn't anymore. The guy sat in a chair and drank tea. At the same time, noticed the enchantress, whether she is already exhausted. Besides, he helped her at all, and she has no willpower at all. She asked the girls in the ward how he had helped her, shouted that because of his disgusting sense of style example, skating rink only took even more time. After all, he was the one who picked out the color of the clothes and material beforehand. Next, Zephyr stated to the enchantress that he was so sorry that we had absolutely no sense of beauty. Suddenly, the woman who greeted them at the beginning stated to the girl that this outfit suited her very well. Hearing this, the protagonist wondered if it was true after all. The woman added that both the design and the fall color palette of this outfit suited her perfectly. The man sitting next to her immediately stated that it was the one they would take then. After all, it looked like someone was really excited about going to Elenis, and at the beginning, literally seemed so indifferent. Hearing this one, the heroine stated that she couldn't say that directly, such worried about the soldiers at the moment. Just still they will meet him for the first time in a long time of separation. After she asked if they would go straight to Pontiac Manor or what. The interlocutors, because of this, remarked that they would. At that, she saw a flaming envelope next to the man that flew by, and wondered if it was a snippet. It was sort of a common way among dragons to transmit information. She recalled that she had often watched Zephyr use them on camping trips. Afterward, he opened the very envelope, and the heroine wondered if it was just something that had happened or not. The fellow stated that it was a snippet with a message from an aide sent by him to the palace. At that, he snapped his fingers and used some sort of magical technique. The protagonist looked at it and wondered if he had cast silence magic on the entire room. Now she was even more curious as to what it said, for if no one but them should hear it all. At this very time, the man announced that he had two pieces of news, one bad and one useless. At the same time, he asked which news he should start with. The words caused the girl to hesitate and stated that he should start with the useless one. Zephyr remarked that it was a fine choice. He went on to inform her that there was currently a purple dragon in the Empire that had changed its appearance just like him. The first change of appearance in 1,000 and 1,500 years of active life. The starting point was the Empire literally 3 years ago. He was also informed that the reports I periodically have to send dragons going through a makeover for the first time suddenly stopped coming. It turns out they're demanding to find him before he makes a mess of things because he's a pain in the ass. At the same time, he exhaled and said that the life of a dragon lord is still too hard. After that, he added that there was also bad news. Further stated the enchanter, and to that tear off the wreath, a leaf, and carefully lived it, and then swallowed. The girl inquired in surprise as to what was being carried here. Zephyr remarked that from the looks of it, getting back from the Archduke's estate was not going to be that easy. The protagonist at this moment was following the order given to her by her interlocutor and chewing on a leaf. The guy, seeing this, stated that they should move out then, rushing on the carriage, and they were on their way to their completely insane old friend. A moment ago, the carriage was in the forest and suddenly found itself in some completely different place. Upon seeing this, the heroine was very much surprised and stated that the below had just been in the woods and what it was. The man stated that it was a defense barrier, the Archduchy of Pontiac. It turns out that this is the very first fortification Elenis created after becoming head of the family. It is what separates the city from the manor. Zephyr went on to say that during the festival, all sorts of rabble can wander around the Archduchy as well, just like they are now. He then inquired from the enchantress if she had lived well the sheet he had told her. The girl remarked that she had lived everything thoroughly already. The guy, because of this, told her that she was good, but still, it was probably worth living another one just in case. And all this was only because they had already arrived at that very place. Next, they were getting out of the carriage, and the guy helped his companion down. When she got out and saw the picture before her, she was absolutely shocked. She immediately stated that the whole roof was the color of celadon, and it looked more expensive than gold. She inquired whether the estate was not more luxurious than an imperial palace. The interlocutor stated to the enchantress that everything is true. In fact, the Pontiac family is much more powerful than the imperial family. Next, the heroine began to look closely at the entire infrastructure around her. At the same time, she thought that this was the place where her friend Elenis grew up. Suddenly, a man approached him and said that it must not be. They were tired on the road. At this, he added that he was glad to welcome them to this place. Zephyr looked at the man at this and stated, "Is this old man still alive or what?" The protagonist inquired of the man as to who this man was and if he was not familiar with him. The interlocutor stated that the man was a half-elf. It also turns out that he must be now well over 200 years old, and with this serpent should be careful, because his soul is blacker than darkness. The man continued on his way, and in doing so stated that all was indeed correct. He was a half-elf. He then stated that he was a little offended, for his soul was not black at all, but he was still glad to meet the noblest of creatures. Zephyr asked how he knew who he was. His interlocutor immediately said that in his entire life, he had only met one living creature who called him a serpent with a soul blacker than darkness. The guy hearing this immediately turned around and exhaled deeply. Then the man looked at the protagonist and said that in addition, the lady standing next to this guy seems to be among the noble ones. The girl immediately bowed to her interlocutor and greeted him. He, in turn, also bowed and greeted her, and called his name Carlotte. He added that he was the manager of the Pontiac family. Zephyr inquired if the warrior was here. The man remarked that if the man was talking about the Archduke, then His Highness was there. However, due to the meeting currently underway, it would be completely impossible to see him today. Considering that the estate's authorities were such noble creatures, they might as well stay there. But the guy interrupted him and stated that you did not worry and led them to him. After all, what was happening he had known for a long time, and for everything that happens next, he takes full responsibility. Carlos thought for a while and then said that he would trust their words and then they should go. Noticing the statute, he would escort them to the Archduke now. And after some time, they were still walking through the corridors of the manor. The boy turned to the enchantress. She, in turn, asked him what he wanted. The one stated that there was something else that he still had not told her about. The heroine asked what it was that he wanted to tell her. Zephyr began his speech. He stated that she knew that the warrior had enough wealth and power to rival the imperial family. It would be preferable to destroy the person threatening the authority of the imperial family. Except the opponent is an immortal hero. Since assassination is impossible, the imperial family has changed its position, and to manipulate the warrior, offered him a political marriage. But as strange as it may seem, the answer was an unconditional refusal. And immediately afterward, he took possession of Kunturna's egg. And whether it was the head of the clan or the imperial knights, whoever opposed him, death awaited them all. He added that basically, the imperial family did something stupid that started it all, and the heroine was about to see what it was. Carlos told them that they had finally arrived. The heroine was very much interested in the words of his interlocutor, and she thought what kind of stupidity it could be. After a moment, they did enter the Archduke's chambers. Elenis finally appeared before the girl's eyes at last. The girl thought about how it had been a while since they had seen each other after all. She also noticed that he had gotten a little thin, but overall he had not changed at all from their last meeting. Suddenly the girl noticed that there were some people sitting in this place as well. At that, she thought to herself, who isn't he? Could it be the very guests who arrived before them? The friend of the protagonist was just saying thank you for coming back alive to that girl. At the same time, strange as it may be, but he called her by the name of Erin. The girl was very much surprised by this and wondered why he called her by her name. At that, she scrutinized that very girl and realized that she looked very much like the old her. Further horror came over her, and she wondered if it was possible that what the Denbane imperial family was doing periodically was this. The Duke said to the girl that if she didn't mind, could he ask her to tell him about the time they had decided to get rid of Kunturna? She immediately remarked that of course she could do so. The boy inquired what she was doing then. She, in turn, remarked that he had picked wormwood on the hill then. He also added a question about what he had said then when he saw her. The girl noticed that he had called her by name then. The protagonist, from hearing the words of this strange dialogue, was still more shocked and wondered how she knew all this. The guy further continued to wonder what happened after that. The fictitious Erin stated that he had told her about the hardships he had endured at Pontiac Manor. It was then that she felt sorry for him and immediately cried. The heroine immediately thought that such a thing that she had just said definitely did not happen, and it turns out to be all a hoax. The guy thanked the girl for sharing her point of view with him. At the same time, he added that the memories of those past days seemed to come alive in his head. But just a moment later, he smiled and said that only her answers were too different from those memories that had settled in his head. The Duke immediately grabbed his sword and killed the man that was sitting next to this girl. She, in turn, said with a smile on her face that it couldn't be, because it was so long ago, and perhaps she had forgotten a little something. But the guy with the gun in his hands added that their exam was a failure. After all, the cursed imperial family had completely lost their conscience. As before, last year were discovered the memoirs of Jamil, so everyone is talking about something similar to this. Then he stood right in front of the girl and asked her where she was. Only she walks like this, fools. The girl immediately knelt down and told His Highness to forgive her and further begged for mercy. After all, she didn't want to deceive him and asked him to believe her that it was the truth. After a short time, she begged the man for mercy. The man, in turn, smiled at her and told her that of course not. Moments later, he leaned his sword against the girl's neck and stated that she was not the slightest bit like Aaron, literally completely. Further stated that it was simply conveying to the imperial family that they had failed again. Next, he informed her to get out of his sight immediately. She immediately did so, while thanking him enormously for putting her alive. The protagonist stood in the room with her companion and perfectly saw and heard what happened. In doing so, she still wondered what had just happened. The very foolishness that the Denbane imperial family had done towards Elenis. They were introducing girls pretending to be his former girlfriend to him. It turns out he'd been seeing some fakes time and time again. Over and over again, he rejected the fake image of her right in front of him. Suddenly, the guy turned to his subordinate, asking him where his clothes were to change. The one, in turn, immediately handed it to him and stated that here she was in front of him. The protagonist thought that now only she realized what Zephyr meant when he said that the Christmas trees had completely delirious us. After all, if his convenient repeated for several decades, it is simply impossible to stay sane. Next, the girl looked at her friend, who at this time was changing clothes. At the same time, his Will C was quite handsome, and the girl was embarrassed by it. After a few moments, she did come to her senses, and thought that after all she had come on business, and not naked bodies to admire. Just then, the Archduke turned to Carlos and asked what kind of people were standing behind him. After all, he had said, it seemed, that he did not want to receive anyone else today. The man heard this immediately and said that he apologized to his master. But the arriving guests expressed a desire to meet him by all means. The lad remarked that if they were the guests for whom he had disobeyed him, they must be someone from his squad. Next, he began to say to whom this rather unfamiliar face belonged. After all, Hania and Jamil are long dead, and his favorite friend he kicked out just a little earlier. It also turns out that Gedor had said he would never catch his eye again in his life. Of all the options listed, he remembered that there was only one option left. At that, he realized who it could be, and his eyes immediately filled with madness. A moment later, he had already appeared at the side of the man Zephyr was pretending to be. Immediately afterward, he grabbed him and asked him what burrow he had crawled out of, as if he were a pathetic lizard. At that, inquired if the guy knew how long he had been looking for him in the first place. Further informed him that he should now give the guy intelligible answers to all the questions if he didn't want to die right now. All this because Hanaya had told him something interesting during her confession before she died. The main character was standing nearby and was shocked by everything that was going on around her. At the same time, that guy was telling his comrade where he had put Aaron's spiritual sphere. Hearing that, this girl thought that the same guy was saying that he had taken the spirit sphere away secretly from everyone, and it turns out that Breath still noticed it. But even though it was not surprising now, after all, a cleric of the highest rank, it was simply impossible not to notice the soul. The Duke continued to say that if he didn't tell him the truth, he would finish him off. Zephyr, because of that, he immediately told him to try if he wanted to. The interlocutor asked if he thought he couldn't get away with it. The protagonist looked at them and felt that murderous aura felt even from afar. He looked absolutely nothing like the Elkins she had known before. She had hoped that he was happily living in a peaceful world where the demonic dragon and his kind didn't exist. But still, she was wrong. Elkins continued to talk, telling the one to tell her what he had done to Aaron's spiritual realm after all. Her body had been purified thanks to the immersion of the light source on reviving the sorceress still failed. And it was all because that guy took away that damn spirit sphere. Zephyr wondered with a smile on his face if he was even good at searching. After all, it turns out that she might have been right next to him at the moment. At the same moment, the protagonist turned to the guy and he immediately looked at her. The girl began to ask if he recognizes her. After all, this is exactly the one with whom he shared joys and sorrows. Also was his friend, with whom they did everything together. But the warrior immediately stated to the guy he was holding at that moment. He noticed that the latter was even more unscrupulous than the mutts of Denbane. After all, at least they had fiddled over a similar appearance. Since he couldn't even do that, at least he'd brought a brave kid who knew how to hide a lie. The heroine realized that he didn't recognize her after all, but at the same time she thought it was natural that he feared her. With her mind, she did not understand it. But when in reality, Elkins failed to recognize her, only looks at her with an icy stare, her heart squeezes pain. Immediately, the girl cried very bitterly because of her feelings of resentment and because of the coldness of the guy. She was also upset by this whole situation, and she hates just the whole thing. The guy noticed this and wondered why the tears were given in 3 streams. After all, he was wondering what could have upset the girl so much. Immediately after that, he approached her. At the same time, he said that it was all true. Just as she had said it was a snake, it could be Aaron. Judging from the traces of white magic, she is a spellcaster just like that girl. And the external differences can easily be justified by what got new bodies from the world tree. He remarked that the one must have worked out every last detail since Zephyr had brought her. That said, he wondered what he should do and how he could best check on the girl after all. She and the heroine thought that Elenis only saw her as a new test subject. It turns out that she really is the real Aaron he was looking for, except she's not sure she matches the very girl created in his imagination. Next, she thought that after enjoying the exam, he would definitely kill her, just like the numerous girls he met earlier. Thinking about all this, the girl immediately stated that she was not Aaron. Hearing this, the guy asked what she was carrying. The girl further went on to say that she doesn't even know who the girl is and tells him that she is not Aaron in any way. At this, she wondered if her words sounded a little disrespectful or if it was just her imagination. The guy asked if she had stated that she wasn't Aaron. The girl remarked that that was exactly the case, and she was unaware of who she was, and she really wasn't. At that, she thought to herself that she was saying she was not, and asked that he believe her. Next, the Duke inquired then who she was in general. The heroine immediately hesitated to answer and then pointed her finger at Zephyr and stated that she was his daughter. The interlocutor wondered what Zephyr's daughter was. After all, does she really mean to say that he met a couple and had cubs? And who the partner was, he was now very curious about. Remembering the words of her friend that in the aspirations of men he is her father and the world tree is her mother, she said that the one in the forest, but now she is like a vegetable. Hearing this, Zephyr was completely shocked. He wondered how a sorceress could say that about the noble and powerful world tree. The warrior stated what it all meant. The girl added that it was all a bit difficult to explain in detail, as it only applied to family members. The interlocutor stated that it turns out her mom is a vegetable, as she says, but then added that it's all okay, as the lowly lizard might have reasons for not talking about it too. Further inquired as to why on her first transformation she came straight here. The heroine thought she would now tell Elenis that she came as she heard he was in danger, and the girl would protect him. But these words were only in her mind. She then stated that her father had told her that she needed a look at the newly hatched cub here. The boy wondered what kind of cub. After all, he was pretty much wondering what this was all about. He was excluded from the Dragon Book, so he had nothing to do with them at all. The heroine wanted to answer this, but immediately hesitated, and Zephyr entered the conversation. He said that he was Kunturna's child after all. They should be monitoring the possibility of him turning into something like that. Yes, and wondered if it was really a dragon at all. Would be created actually a normal cub. His first words after the appearance of the inheritance would be, "He is not his mother." And who is this miserable little man? Then he would immediately decide to avoid him. And in that case, the sylphs would have informed him at once. The heroine thought it was a good thing her partner had recovered quickly while the girl was stalling. Next, he went on to say that he wouldn't take the Duke's child, but they could tell him what the problem was. As it happens, it would be advantageous for him to show it to them himself. The warrior listened carefully to what the man was saying, and then he thought for a while, agreed, and invited them to follow him. Next, they all did so, and followed the corridor of this huge manor. The heroine was walking and thought that he was pretty far away. It turns out that the cub is so big that it is not kept in the main building, but turns out in an annex. Suddenly, the man announced that they were finally there. He invited them to come right behind him. He stated that the cub was lying in a cradle and they could pass through and watch. The heroine entered the room and immediately began to look at the room. Then thought the room looked quieter and cozier than she had imagined. However, even with the lights off, she feels disgusted and anxious this moment. It all seems to be happening because of the proximity to the source, and those two feel the same way. It turns out that all of this is happening, and this sinister energy is coming from Kunturna's offspring. The reason why Elkins has been branded a madman, and the reason why he's antagonizing the world because of it. Now the girl thought she would destroy the culprit with her own hands. But literally, at the same moment, a small hand of a child appeared from the cradle. The heroine looked at the cradle and noticed that a small child was lying there and was surprised because of this. Everyone in the room was shocked at what they saw. The heroine saw what the cub had become and thought he was so cute. As he did so, he made eye contact with the Archduke. The girl stood between them and wondered if it seemed to her that he was asking to be held. She turned to her former best friend and asked if she could take him in her arms. The one with coldness in his words remarked that he didn't care about that at all. Hearing the fertilization, the protagonist immediately went and took the baby in her arms. Next, she leaned over to him and thought that he already smelled pretty good. She wondered if everyone wanted to say that this child was the source of the dark energy. She realized that this was not the case, as she could only smell light energy from him. But where that strange energy was coming from was unclear. Zephyr immediately turned to the warrior. He asked if it was true that this child had hatched from an egg 10 years ago. The one, in turn, told him that it was indeed true, though he had not announced it anywhere, but there could be no doubt about it. The ally of the protagonist said that it is simply impossible, because it turns out that this child is definitely not a dragon. The Duke asked what it says and how it is not a dragon. He did not understand how this man could be so sure of his words. The man told him that a dragon baby does not need a human form ever. Once born, a dragon resembles a small lizard with wings. Rapidly developing, after 5 months he goes in search of a new place and begins to live independently. The protagonist immediately asked who then this child is, if he is not a dragon, to which the boy stated to her that he was a half-breed. The girl remarked that she had heard a little about them, but after all, such children are born from a person in the body, which contains dragon seed. Now how could they be a child hatched from an egg? Zephyr noticed that it was usually round, a human woman who had fallen in love with a dragon, but occasionally there are cases where, having fallen in love with a man, the dragon itself lays an egg containing human energy. Or there is another variant. The empty egg is fertilized by force, covering it with its own energy. The heroine immediately wondered what else fertilization with her own energy artificially means. How could it be, and what it meant, she wondered. Next, the protagonist's comrade turned to the Archduke. He inquired of him whether the fellow had spilled blood on the egg. The guy, because of this, did not say anything to him and just kept silent, continuing to listen. Not hearing the answer, he realized that this is how it was. It turns out that originally the egg laid by Kunturna was not fertilized empty. In 70 years of caring for it, there had been no reaction, so the warrior guessed what was wrong. It was then that he had willed the egg, magic, and energy into the egg, sprinkling it with blood. Said this of the unfathomable magical power he had gotten Kunturna's heart. Now he pointed his finger and stated that this was how this child came to be. At this, he asked how far he was going to go, since it was so necessary to create a child in this manner or not. The protagonist thought that these words were not for children's ears at all. At that, she turned to the spirits and asked if they could muffle all the sound as well. Zephyr continued to talk about what, after all, he was only thinking, committing this crazy act. After all, sprinkling an egg with human blood would not make a normal dragon. The spirits listened to the heroine and fulfilled her request. The girl immediately thought that it was all thanks to the wreath from the world tree. Even without a contract, the spirits act according to her will, it turns out. The heroine also thought that even though he is still young and cannot understand the content of the conversation, cannot realize that he was not a long-awaited child, that he was born because someone it was profitable, but it is better for him to remain in ignorance. The Archduke, after a short time of conversation by interest, he was only interested in one thing. What is the likelihood that this child is carrying out Kunturna's abilities when he does grow up? The heroine went and put the baby in its crib, which had been lying there the whole time. Zephyr kept asking how many more mistakes this warrior was going to make. Suddenly, a girl ran up to them and declared that enough of this pointless talk. She added that they both needed to calm down, because even though he was still a kid, he could still feel the atmosphere here. Next, the heroine turned to her so-called father. She said that even for a half-breed, it is not normal to remain an infant for 10 years. It turns out that they should observe him a little longer, since his birth and the combination itself were extraordinary. It turns out there are many things unknown in the world, even dragons, similar to how her father and mother created her. The heroine immediately thought that he himself gave his blood to the world tree, and he and this guy are something alike. He, in turn, thought about what the sorceress is carrying, because also the guy's egg of a demonic dragon. Further, the girl said that in any case the child should be reviewed, and not the two of them, not the interested party. He is often the right representative from the dragon family, and she can call it that. Suddenly, the baby was out of his crib again, and the heroine wondered if he wanted to be in her arms again. The warrior just stood there watching from the sidelines. At the same time, the heroine went and took the baby in her arms. At the same time, he was quite happy to be with this particular girl. The Archduke stated that it turns out it wasn't a bad idea, and it made sense. An observer for the half-breed who would be able to objectively assess what was going on. It turns out that the marshmallow's daughter would be just such a person. The guy went on to say that he was lucky to find a candidate who fit the description perfectly. The heroine asked if it's all about her, he says now. The guy remarked, it turns out that he did not get everything sorted out with the observer. The girl immediately looked at her ally. He, in turn, exhaled deeply and stated that he too would stay. After all, it was his daughter. But the Archduke stated what he was talking about after all. After all, it turns out that only his daughter will stay here and nothing else. It turns out, probably, he just misunderstood him then. After all, it really pisses him off that her blood runs in her. Mash, due to necessity, he will allow her to live here as a literal exception. He then turned to the girl and added that he would allow her to stay at Pontiac Manor as a nanny and teacher. If still she did not agree, then the conversation would be over. Whatever changes to the child, their race would henceforth never see it again. The heroine immediately realized that this was a final warning. If she left here, he really wouldn't share anything with them. She then looked at her former friend and thought that she wanted to give him happiness and yet freedom. And also, for some reason, she wanted very badly for this unwanted child to find her happiness as well. Without hearing the answer, the Archduke turned away and remarked that if she did not want to, then immediately let her get out. But the girl immediately interrupted him and said that she agreed. It turns out that she will stay here and look after this very child. After a small amount of time, the protagonist was already looking at the room. She wondered if she was going to live here, because the room looked too spacious for one person, and wondered if Carlet had made a mistake. He, for his part, remarked that he had not, and that was right. It is the second largest rest in the whole estate, invariable rule of the Pontiac family, with all their heart to take care of their dear guests. Suddenly, the Archduke came up to the girl and said that everything had worked out well, that a nanny for the child just found. But then he added that he had not yet heard her name, and he wondered how he should address her. The girl immediately hesitated to answer. At the same time, she thought that she couldn't just call herself Arin and would have to think of something. After a moment, she remembered that, come to think of it, one name had been there before that she was madly fond of. Immediately afterward, she announced with a smile on her face that her name was Adele. At that, she thought that this was finally the day when she could use it. The interlocutor stated, It turns out her name is Adele. In turn, he added that he is Archduke Elkinis Pontiac. It turns out the child that the girl will take care of is named Rintius Irene Pontiac. But it turns out she can call him Pro Rinti. The heroine immediately thought, it turns out the name of the city as a middle name. At the same time, the guy stated that this is the end and wished Adele a good vacation. She in turn thought that finally she would be able to relax at least a little. At this point, Carlotte apologized and turned to Lady Adele. He inquired if he could ask one question of her. The girl remarked to him what he wanted after all, and what happened. The man immediately stated that it turns out, in fact, he and Mr. Zephyr are not father and daughter after all, and wondered if he understood it correctly. From such a question, the protagonist was simply shocked and stood in a stupor. At the same time thought, how after all this man knows all this? After all, not even a day has not passed since she appeared here. In this, she told herself that she needed calmness and only calmness. After all, she can just pretend that she does not understand what he is about, and the matter will be over. More, the protagonist did not begin to mumble something, trying to fool the man. But the one, in turn, said that the lady is completely so and cannot lie. He added that from the moment of their arrival, Leto estate of their meeting with His Highness, he did not call each other father and daughter. That was exactly how the latter had guessed. Hearing this, the heroine wondered if they hadn't been careful enough. After all, she too would have suspected something wrong at that very moment. Carlotte went on to say that Mr. Zephyr only used one nickname and called her a sorceress, if the person he was addressing in such a manner was Lady Erin. Now he stated that it was just really unbelievable, The protagonist from this turn of events was simply shocked. At the same time thought that he even realized who she was, because this is absolutely not the way to go. It turns out that you need to come up with a good excuse about all this. The girl noticed that just she, as well as Arin, knows how to summon spirits. So it turns out that he occasionally calls her a sorceress. Also, they have a lot in common with Zephyr, so they really are almost like father and daughter. The man noticed that then he understood everything. But the heroine, because of his appearance, realized that he especially did not believe, after she thought that if she continued to talk, she would only make him seem more suspicious and nothing else. Then she turned to the man and said that he had a small request for him. She immediately asked him not to tell Mr. Elkinis about it under any circumstances. He at once declared to her that of course he would. After all, he was now speaking to her not as a butler of the Pontiac family, but as an old man who had lived a long life and was curious about what was going on. He said that she could rest assured that he had no thought of spreading this information, wherever it might be. For as I have long known, he is a half-elf. Because of the blood of elves plastered in his veins, he loves nature. It turns out that when the girl arrived at the mansion today, he felt an incredibly strong natural energy, so warming and peaceful that it took his breath away. The heroine wondered if it was true after all. She thought about the fact that, apparently, the body received from the world tree is able to attract the elf's attention by its mere appearance. Further, the palace did not state that it seems to him that she would be able to produce such an effect on the master. The girl apologized and asked what he had just said, but he remarked to her that he had been talking to himself. And what can you take from an old man, because this happens literally often? After that, he left the room and said that now he would leave it. He hoped that this place would become a home for her for the near future, and that there would be no inconvenience. At the same time, well asked that she take care of His Highness and the young lord at that. Hearing those words, the girl thought that Carloth does put his soul into serving Elkinis after all. Nor does he seem like a bad man, as the Zephyr claimed at the time. The old, polite gentleman's cheers were quite pleasant to her, but suddenly Zephyr appeared behind her back and addressed the enchantress. The heroine was a little frightened and stated to the guy that he scared her. At the same time, she asked how long he had been there and stated that he should constantly enter through the door, not as he always does. The interlocutor stated that the owner of the estate had chased him away, although he had done so anyway. The girl further added that he was certainly in time now. After all, if they found out that he stole her spirit realm and the entire mainland, he would be famous. The guy stated that if it wasn't for him, the girl would have died, and how can she just talk to him like that now? He went on to say that it is true what they say, raising children is a thankless job. The heroine asked if he would talk to her like that forever, as if she were a child. Here I noticed that he below still with the world tree she was made. Further, he inquired how the girl had turned her tongue to call the world tree a vegetable. The girl stated that it just came to her head and that it was not a problem. Further, for some time, they just continued to quarrel. And after a while, both of them got pretty tired. Zephyr stated that it was still good that they were still alive. The heroine added that it was all true, because it seemed to her that it really was the end. Next, I thought that the current Elkins is not at all the man she knew. It turns out he kills people without even blinking an eye, even though he doesn't hesitate to attack his comrade, with whom they once risked their lives on the battlefield together. The heroine then turned to Zephyr and wondered if she had been too naive. After all, then she thought that if she sacrificed herself, then everyone could live a peaceful and happy life. But it turns out she was wrong. Her actions not only did not save Elkinas, but even on the contrary made him mad. Now she was wheeling herself around and saying that everything was probably because of her. Her interlocutor immediately stood up and began to ponder on what to say to his partner. Next, he placed his hand on the enchantress's head and told her that they had survived because of her. And it so happened that thanks to then her sacrifice, he sent us all of them. Because of this, it turns out that not everyone would be capable of such a thing. After that, he stated that she didn't even think that the beliefs and honor she was trying to defend were meaningless. It turns out that in reality, she did save Elkinas. Now she had another chance to save him. The heroine thanked her interlocutor with tears of joy in her eyes. She noticed that it was thanks to him that she had cheered up a bit after all. Just a moment later, she jumped to her feet. She went on to say that instead of dwelling on the past, it was better to think about the future and asked if she was right now. The interlocutor remarked that she had indeed come to her senses quickly. Then he asked her what she was planning to do in the future. The girl remarked to him that first and foremost, she would of course be looking after Rinty's growing up. There was also something else that required their attention. For there was some kind of scary, ominous energy felt in the nursery. The boy remarked to her that if she was talking about it, he felt it too. Then a strange, very force was hovering there. Now they needed to find out where it was coming from after all. Filled the room with strange energy at first, the heroine thought that its source is the owner of the room. After all, it belongs to the offspring of the demon dragon. But it turns out that by taking the child in her arms, the heroine felt no negative effect and no sinister energy. Elkinas definitely known to the force circulating around the room. Now the girl wondered why he had left her unaware of it. Zephyr added that she would find out more about this energy as she watched the half-breed grow and develop. The girl remarked that it would be like that, and she would also put an end to it. The interlocutor immediately inquired as to what On meant by an end. The protagonist, stated Zephyr, as he said, her death saved many lives, except that the fact that she thereby drove Elkinas to madness hasn't gone anywhere. She just can't pretend to be unaware that even after 80 years, her friend is fixated on the past. She hopes that he will now be able to accept her death and come to terms with it. In doing so, will live happily and will laugh and will cry, all while being close to the person she loves. The interlocutor said that for this Christmas tree, Nose will have to get rid of the feelings he has for the girl. The heroine added that she herself knows what he feels for her, and it turns out it is necessary to deal with it in the first place. Zephyr was shocked by such words and immediately thought that it was not a short-sighted sorceress who realized what this guy felt for her. At the same time, he wondered if she had guessed his true feelings. But the girl immediately said that it turns out Christmas tree's us just attached to her. The interlocutor took a deep breath and said that she, as always, and does not disappoint him. The heroine was surprised to ask what she had said wrong after all. The guy went on to say that he, of course, believes that she should hear about it personally from the warrior, but his feelings are still an unusual affection. After all, it turns out that you are a bomb that came out of nowhere and never burns with a broken fuse. After stated to the enchantress that you that well thought that precedes the attachment. After a moment's reflection, the girl stated, "Did the one think Elkinas liked her?" He did not remark that he rather could not fathom how the girl could deny it. The heroine added that it was simply impossible. After all, he looked like he didn't quite like being around her from the very beginning. Always when they were together, he was forever looking around hoping to escape. At one point, the girl even thought she stank. Zephyr was already sitting there, not sure how to prove it all to her. At that, he stated that he really didn't understand why he liked her after all. After all, it turns out that she was even now allocated the chambers intended for the Archduchess. The protagonist noticed that the room was chosen by Carlotte, not Elenis. The interlocutor immediately asked her what she had just said, and he thought that it was the most sneaky snake that was terribly guessing. Then the girl shouted, "What else was that look from him, and whether it is impossible for her to live here? Was it a trap prepared by Carlotte to set her up? He found out that his master had gone crazy over her, and that's why he prepared it, or what?" She then turned to Zephyr in a panic and wondered what she should do and if she was in danger after all. The guy asked her if that snake had already gotten wind of her true identity. The heroine added that he had asked her to take care of her master and young master after all. Wasn't he faking it? At that, she stated to Zephyr to tell her at least something already. The boy remarked to the enchantress that it wasn't what she thought, so she might as well just calm down right now. At the same time, he thought that he was already pandering, and it annoyed him a lot. Except that he knew Carlotte had overestimated the cleverness of their enchantress. Now it turned out that the result he wanted could not be achieved so easily. After all, it turns out that to deceive this snake heroine just need to behave the same way as she now behaves. After all these conversations, her interlocutor finally left her. Now it was night, and the protagonist was lying in her bed. Next, she woke up and got out of bed. At the same time, thought that she had fallen asleep after all, and it would soon be dawn. After that, she went and sat down near the window. At that, she thought about whether Zephyr had returned safely, for she was still worried whether he had found a place to stay. The saddest thing for her to think about was that she had fallen asleep right in the middle of their conversation. The airwaves were talking about Hanya taking over as head of the church. Also about Jamil that took care of the calm underworld of the Denbane Empire. Most interesting to him was that both of them kept detailed records of the squad that fought Kunterna. In fact, just before his death, the Archduke had stated that Hanaya had told him something interesting during her confession. Also before that, he stated that when Jamil's memoirs were discovered, everyone said something similar. The heroine's interlocutor said that the confession and the memoir she heard about during the day are just such records. Hania's confession represents her recorded voice messages. What Elenis heard was apparently not revealed to the general public and was said for him alone. Jamil's memoirs detail the march to Kunterna. Remarkably, they were divided into parts and sold on the black market for impressive sums. She herself has left the world, leaving the factions and family with such a fortune that they can live happily all their lives. And, most likely, it is these diaries that are being used by the fake Arons sent by the imperial family. After hearing this, the protagonist said that Jamil is really unbelievable. It turns out that she herself sold the diaries and left an inheritance. My interlocutor remarked that she is just a spoiled child. Further, the girl thought that Hania also turns out to be amazing. After all, that same little girl had become the head of the church. She remembered the two of them walking and talking together. The girl then told the heroine that she knew so much about nature. She in turn wondered, she also learned all the prayers, and it turns out the same. But Hanaya then remarked that it's all right for her, after all. She had just memorized them in the monastery since childhood. The heroine smiled and also remarked to her that she too, when she was a little girl, also learned from her mom all the time. So it turns out that rote learning, apparently, is also very important. But her interlocutor noted that it's not about her at all, because the sorceress is really interesting and charming. The heroine then became quite embarrassed and said that she thought it was just the same. She was cute and charming. Her interlocutor did so again and thanked her for her kind words. Next, Aron remarked that in the future she would buy a house and plant medicinal herbs in the backyard. And now she asked the girl whether she would have tea with her then or not. Hanaya of this also inquired if she could, for she still thought that she only drank tea with the warrior. She added that it was just some kind of luck that she got some chance.